Welcome everyone to today's session, How to Thrive Beyond 2020, Boost Your Sales in China. We'll explore and we'll share with you what makes China such a strong opportunity for brands, organizations and businesses positioned to take advantage and to get ahead. And why that's not only the case when it comes to getting by for the short term, but also just positioning yourself to thrive and grow and succeed in the longer term as well. And China's comparatively strong position is a bit of an open secret at this stage. In our very first webinar back in March, China is the key to surviving and thriving was still kind of flying under everyone's radars. And I still think that the extent of the opportunity that China offers is a bit underappreciated and undervalued. And I'll get into some of the reasons why with you today. So, a little about today's session. I'm Brad, and I research and create educational content around the tech, tools, and innovations in the world of Chinese advertising. I'll share with you today's presentation on China and where they're at now compared with the rest of the world. Later on, you'll be joined by Henrik, a serial entrepreneur and China marketing expert who lived through COVID-19 from the start in Shanghai until he was able to return to Norway a few weeks ago. Joining Henrik will be Jay, our CEO and co-founder, and Jay has an extensive experience across Europe and Asia building and developing international teams and businesses. Henrik and Jay will take over for the Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions either now or during the presentation, feel free to pop those into chat. If you want to get specific and ask specifically about your industry or your niche, please go ahead. That's exactly why the chat widget's there and it's there to be used. So whether or not I dive deep into your vertical, feel free to ask away in chat anyway. To explain a little who we are and what we do at AdChina.io, we help organizations, brands, and businesses get set up to sell into China. And since coronavirus, we've had a lot of companies coming to us who were happy in their traditional markets until the recent downturn. And they've entered China as a way to get into a market with more positive signals in both the short and the long term. And as you'll see, the data reflects that. So diving in today, we're exploring three main ideas. The first is that although China suffered greatly in being taken offline for about 8 to 12 weeks in the first quarter, they've now bounced back after going through those struggles. Secondly, we'll get into the opportunities that exist during this uncertain time across a range of industries and verticals to ultimately show that these opportunities could be helpful to get you not only through this crisis, but potentially set you up in a strong position during the next few years at least. And the third point, I'll show you some avenues to sell into China and other ways you can set yourself up to sell more efficiently and more effectively. Most companies and most entrepreneurs have thought about China, but not everyone has taken the steps. For some, their home market has been too good to justify venturing outside of it. Others are unsure whether there's really that much potential in China, and some wonder whether the barriers to entry might be too high or too difficult, and we'll address those a little in today's session as well. First, let's dive into where China's at right now from a broad perspective, and we'll of course take a look at a few specific industries in there as well. From an economy-wide perspective, the global investment management firm BlackRock see China's economy returning to near trend growth towards Q4 of this year and already recognize that April and May have turned things around quite nicely. And likewise, this PMI graph shows a strong swing back to normal as well. And that metric represents economic health and it indicates that there's strong demand. And as a result, decision makers, analysts, and investors are feeling optimistic. But it's also true that no graph guarantees the future either. And the point here isn't to say China is back to where they were. It's like the virus never happened and it has perfect market conditions. They were hit hard and fast and suffered through that 8 to 12 weeks of lockdowns. The point is that unlike other world economies, they were able to come out the other side and have largely returned to normal, where the impact of the virus has hampered many other parts of the world and continues to do so. China's been trending back towards where they were for a few months now, and other countries are still kind of flat and much more slow in that returning to their original trends. And part of the reason for that is China's transitioning economy and increased consumption within the country as well. So let's now take a look at consumption. China's top 30 to 40% of the population are, of course, the major consumers. And during the height of the virus, the demand and purchases for many goods plummeted. And that's partly because there was less to do, people weren't outside as much, and weren't in an environment that was overly conducive to spending money. And there was probably also the fear that this might last longer, a lot of uncertainty, so naturally it would be wiser to save. That said, online shopping boomed, yet supply constraints and temporarily inflated prices turned some people off until things had started to stabilize again, and we'll get into where things are at shortly. As a result of the lockdowns that were put in place to try and eliminate the spread of the virus, the economy slowed down considerably. As you can see here, there was a dramatic drop in January and February across most sectors, and there were a few that performed better too. As you can see, the financial sector and the info and tech services sector were up. Almost everywhere else was in the red. The next thing I wanted to share with you was China compared with other markets. Most of Europe is in a similar enough position to the US and Australia, but I didn't get a chance to include it on here. The point of this is that as far back as April, China was in a better position than the US and Australia were in May across those three metrics there. So outside China, the recovery has been this longer, drawn out process, and for every week it goes on, it becomes much harder to return to the trend lines that we were in before the virus. Meanwhile, in China, there's been this massive entrepreneurial push as a result of the government relaxing regulation and burdens on businesses. Street vending businesses are popping up, and many of the companies that sell these trucks to facilitate it have actually sold out. And it's not just food vending, too, it's anything and everything, both products and services, because it's stimulating the economy without costing the government anything. There have been stimulus spending measures, like almost every country, but these kind of options, like you see here, allow China to get ahead with the recovery without devaluing their currency or creating as much artificial spending just to pump the numbers up. So, just further comparisons to the rest of the world, you can see China's GDP impact is quite minimal. It's the second from the end on the right there. And even if a second wave were to erupt this year, it's still one of the best positioned countries. So, looking at this graph, the light red is the impact of the initial hit, and if it comes back with a vengeance for a second round, that'll be the darker red that you can see on the bottom there. And even if that happened, China would not take too much of a hit to GDP, as it's already taking a very small hit compared with everywhere except Korea and Indonesia anyway. And in the graph on the right, you have the quarterly GDP, and China has been and looks like it'll continue to stay well ahead of the world average. And both emerging and advanced economies on aggregate as well. In fact, it suggests that on aggregate, the advanced economies won't return to Q4 2019 levels until the first quarter of 2022. And that's a very long time to be stuck trying to sell into a weak market. And that's exactly why we're doing this webinar. And just please feel free to pop any questions into chat as they come up, and we'll get back to you, or add it to our bank of questions to be addressed in the Q&A at the end. While it's true that hard numbers and real data is more important than sentiment, I saw this graph and had to include it because of how stark the comparison is when it comes to China. The question given to survey respondents was, I believe that the recovery after the crisis will be fast. 26% agree with that in the UK, 36% in Germany, 32% in America, but a whopping 77% in China agreed and only 8% disagreed, with most countries outside China expressing a great deal more uncertainty and pessimism. And it makes sense because China's back to work, back to spending and consuming, and things are largely humming along nicely again. as the virus transitions into more of a memory than a current pain point. Whereas in the rest of the world, most countries still have cases, still have an economic impact from all the indications. Those hard times are set to continue into the future as well. And now the Chinese are traveling again, but they're doing that within China as well. So they're consuming and buying, but also doing that from within their country. So the way to capitalize on it is to establish your presence and your brand in China. Now, China represents a pretty huge opportunity for a lot of reasons. Retail and e-commerce numbers are very strong, and physical retail is even recovering as well, with long queues being observed around Apple stores, Chanel, and other major brands. One of the most effective brands, One of the most effective ways brands are selling is through key opinion leaders, or KOL live streams on popular mobile apps. Typically, a famous person features the product in a live stream, not in an overtly salesy way, but just talking about the benefits, using the product and showing it off. That's driving a crazy amount of consumption and really taken off since the virus hit. And I know I've shown this graph before, but I expect there are very few markets positioned to turn back towards positive growth in June like China is here. And I noticed the graph's not labeled, but it's the year over year retail sales numbers. And just to drive this point home, China is certainly well supplied, but our perception is that almost all markets are not oversupplied. There's competition, but we're seeing organizations start test campaigns and carve out a niche of buyers. Of course, there's live streaming, which I just mentioned. There's private traffic, which is essentially organic marketing efforts, building a strong brand of engaged and loyal followers on social media. Brand identity and values are a lot more present and prevalent in China than in the rest of the world, I would say. And at the end of the day, that makes it easy for them because they have a lot more defined buyer personas to target. Western companies tend to be a lot more broad and amorphous in that sense, but not all. Like luxury brands, they do pretty well outside China, but in general, China has a very strong sense of branding. Stifled demand is an opportunity in both China and in the West. There's a lot of pent up demand among people who wanted to go and do things that they haven't been able to, whether that's to go skiing, to go to the movies, to get out and explore nature out in the bush, to take a road trip, participate in sports, social clubs, whatever it is. People are more willing to buy and get what they need to do after they've wanted to do it for so long. When it comes to messaging, highlighting the cost effectiveness is a major plus. China has a very high savings rate, and in general, they're quite wise with their money. International products and services do have a higher perceived quality, and if that's coupled with a competitive price, then you amplify how compelling your product will be perceived. Like all things in marketing, you play up the benefits rather than the features, of course. Another trend is to offer buy in bulk options where it makes sense, of course, for the product in question. It really taps in again to that thriftiness. It saves on future shipping costs, often comes with a discount compared with only buying one of the product. And if you put these into practice, you'll integrate into the Chinese marketplace and have a better chance of cementing your brand beyond 2020. Another very important move is to make use of shopping sales. The most recent major shopping sale was the 618 sale, running from June the 1st to the 18th. And there was a pretty massive growth since last year across a range of consumer goods, fresh food, tech, and appliances. And just wanted to focus on the fresh food here because one way China shifted post coronavirus was a much stronger emphasis on health, healthy eating, active lifestyles, general fitness, improvement has taken off there, and the trend looks to continue long term. I recall from a previous webinar that 3 out of 4 people had a newfound commitment to their health and had already planned to purchase fitness trackers and wearables, or they'd already done so, and start using apps to track what they're eating, as well as eat more fresh produce. and I don't have it on this slide, but I have it in my notes here. A Nielsen study showed that um, China's quarantine increased online shopping habits, with 89% of consumers saying they will be more willing to buy daily necessities, including fresh products, online once the pandemic is over, and 80% saying that they'd pay more attention to healthy eating in future. Oh yeah, I thought this graph was very interesting too, because the Chinese people are currently unable and less likely to be less willing to travel abroad. It's anticipated a greater share of purchases will happen in China than overseas, and over the longer term, it will increase market projections rather than hamper them. It's based on data from Boston Consulting Group. So the purchases that would have been made while abroad are now being carried over and made within the country from those who aren't able to travel. Let's now take a look at a few of China's recovery trends that have come out of many different studies, surveys, and data analysis. First, here is that there is a greater focus, as I mentioned, on health and relaxation. On the health side of things, that's very pronounced in terms of boosting immune systems, disinfecting, and taking preventative measures. Skincare and general cleansing are also big for predominantly similar reasons. It comes back to hygiene more than anything else. Secondly, they're spending more time at home with family, and while that's starting to change and foot traffic has returned to pre coronavirus levels in most shopping centres, the trend of preparing food at home and connecting and enjoying time with the family has remained strong. Another major trend is that an increased awareness about fitness, and again, this ties in with health and immune system. They want to get stronger, healthier, boost the immune systems, and increasingly, women are getting into fitness at much higher rates than before coronavirus as well. With a strong desire to travel and a population that can't leave China due to travel restrictions or just not wanting to risk catching coronavirus abroad, there's a huge amount of travel happening within China. So you have East exploring West and South checking out the North, just to see and explore new landscapes and new cities. And this is driving a mini boom in travel equipment, actually, which I think would have been very hard to predict ahead of time. But it's good that an industry that would or could have otherwise been crippled is able to do well despite the virus. And as I mentioned earlier, car and auto parts are rebounding because the massive losses in the first quarter. So it was one of those red circles that was way down in Q1. Now, owning a car has become very desirable in China, especially for families. And again, this ties in with the health and the contamination element that ride sharing or even walking can expose people to. On the right, you can see a graph from the IMF World Economic Outlook report. For the month of April, China and India are the only countries anticipated to come in with a positive GDP in 2020 and are set to dominate in 2021, with double the projected growth of almost any other market. And the key point here is that China holds the growth potential for so many companies. In markets where everything is looking negative, and growth next year will probably be quite lacking, it might be wise to ask yourself what China might be able to do for you and your business. So things are trending much closer towards normal in China than the rest of the world right now. People have long ago returned to restaurants and physical stores, so there's no longer that reluctance to go outside. And yet, several trends that were established during the lockdowns have remained, and some new trends and opportunities have opened up as China itself has opened up. So, now I'd like to talk about some of the opportunities and give another level of context around why China is in a uniquely strong position compared to other world markets, not just relying on projections, but what's really happening. China has been the world's largest consumer market since 2015. Since overtaking the US, it continued to grow fiercely and increase its lead. Part of this growth is simply because it's never been easy to sell into China, and that is true right now, even. While many countries have locked down passenger travel to and from many regions, there's no embargo on the physical flow of goods. China also invested in their economy with vouchers. I think I mentioned that. And additionally, they're relaxing some of their regulations by creating new import and export zones and implementing new policies that are spurring growth. And all of this is happening in the context of a global climate where the situation seemed to get worse and worse as time's gone by. A lot of experts are anticipating that world markets will continue to struggle with this virus and the economic impact of the quarantines for 6 months, 12 months, even 18 months. But right now, we have this enormous market who are accustomed to buying online. There were a lot of people who hadn't actually bought online before this virus, so there's a massive increase in online users now, too. And eMarketer, which is an organization that watches and reports on marketing trends, anticipates that traditional ad spend will fall off in China, while digital ad spend will increase by 13% this year. At that point, 3/4 of all ads will be digital. So that's definitely worth at least asking the question, could China be a viable market for helping us to get through 2020 and set us up to thrive in the longer term? Looking at a few other industries now, we can see at the height of the virus, demand decreased in the beauty sector as well as alcohol, luxury, clothing, in person fitness, travel, and physical recreation, all the things that typically are done in a social setting. Whereas demand increased across medical care and insurance, nutrition and health, mobile apps, games and entertainment, household cleaning, food and drink, preventative health care. And some of those trends continue, others are starting to return back to those normal trend lines, and we'll dive into those shortly. China. China coming back gives a lot of opportunities, as you can see here. This is a snapshot of signups to our platform since this all kicked off in February, showing the diverse interest in China. As you can see, some industries have more representation here than others, but there's a broad range of businesses that are reaching out to us. What this shows is a rising awareness around the globe, a rising interest in China. If you're not already thinking about China, it might be time to, because your competitors probably are. And the point I wanted to make here was, while many are still caught up in panic mode and trying to make ends meet, we're not the only ones aware of China as an opportunity. In many cases, services can be delivered entirely online, and while you aren't able to fly, your products can and they can get to their destination. Likewise, you don't need to meet in person to do business. And for now, we'll take a look at a few more industries. And if you're involved in an industry that we don't cover here, feel free to ask about it in the comments or get in touch with us at the end of the webinar. So for now, I'd like to dive into some of the most obvious sectors. We have retail sales shifting to China, with logistics and shipping running very close to normally, and in some cases actually above normally due to the increased demand and online sales happening at the moment. The barriers to enter to China are still low. With cross-border e-commerce, you don't need a Chinese entity to do business. You also don't need to set up your logistics entirely on your own. If your website loads in China, you can start selling now on your current website, or you can get one set up. And if you're interested in China but not sure whether your website loads, we'll show you where to contact us at the end and we can test that for you. It can be quite quick and easy to set up a point of sale in China, and we can point you in the right direction for how to do that as well. And with technology like AdChina.io, advertising in China is now easy. We've made it similar to advertising on Facebook or Google. As consumption shifts more and more online, with influencers spruiking products on streaming platforms, a DIY approach is now more achievable. And plus, physical distribution in stores is becoming less relevant as the population becomes more accustomed to buying online. So if you have stock that's moving slowly and sales that are slipping in your home markets, China might offer a way out of that. What would it mean for your business if you were able to start selling in China within the next month? As I mentioned previously, live streaming is booming and e-commerce average use time is up. Corresponding to this, online selling platforms are booming, with JD completing more e-commerce sales in the first quarter of 2020 than the entirety of 2019, Given how huge that platform is, that is truly mind blowing. Another industry that will thrive not only in China but also in the West is education. And this is a truly global opportunity. And you might recall it was one of the industries both the US and China have anticipated to grow in 2020. There'll be a lot of people learning new things online to retrain or learn new skills in the post coronavirus world. And this is going to happen both in and outside of China. We've also experienced firsthand a huge increase in education related companies coming to us. With travel restricted, online options such as online education and open universities still allow students to get a Western education if that's important to them. Tutoring and coursework services are also expanding as no one wants to feel behind. Chinese schools are opening up after going digital, and this is shifting the view of parents to be more and more likely to use digital tools for learning. Even in the West, schools are running via Zoom and other apps, and parents are changing their beliefs about whether these tools can really work. During this period, a lot of potential lost time and progress academically, many want to make up for that. But there's also an opportunity for other forms of education as well, like language tuition and even professional courses that focus on marketable skills will do well in the coming months as people are trying to position themselves to increase and expand their ability to create value. One example of education's increase is in WeChat mini programs in the education space. Essentially, these are apps within the WeChat app, and there's been a sharp increase in use across these five categories here. When it comes to the beauty market, we've had a split of winners and losers during the pandemic. So, high end beauty product sales plummeted, and no one's going out as no one was going out with very little demand for those products. On the other hand, everyone wants to maximize cleanliness and hygiene due to fear of the virus. So, those products actually shot up. So much so that many online stores actually sold out and demand was not able to be supplied, at least as quickly as customers would have liked. Now, since the end of March and especially April, things have opened back up, and even cosmetics bounced back into positive growth territory. And one niche that really opened up as a result of skincare and hygiene taking off is sensitive skin. People were buying these skincare products and discovering they had reactions to them. I think around 5% of people have sensitive skin to some extent. And when you're talking many tens of millions of people, that 5% suddenly becomes a very lucrative market with the increased demand. Now, while it's true people are going out, masks are still prevalent and may remain so for some time. That means lipstick and cheeks are covered, and so makeup is less important in those areas. On the other hand, eye related products have experienced a huge boom as a result. And finally, senior citizens are a new target market with the demand much higher now than before the virus. So I'd like to now share a few words of wisdom from David Ogilvy, known best as the father of advertising. Studies of the last six recessions have demonstrated that companies which do not cut back their advertising budgets achieve greater increases in profit than companies which do cut back. Super relevant to this situation, it drives home the importance of keeping the pedal down through the hard times to set yourself to come up on top in the good times. Of course, you need to be wise with how you invest your money, but the logic is that advertising shouldn't be cut back when times are hard, any more than you'd cut back any other essential aspect of your product or service. And on the topic of advertising, I'd like to let you know a little about the AdChina.io platform. Essentially, we connect with the top ad channels in China, social media channels, online search, and display feeds to allow you to run ads in China through a platform that is just like running ads on Facebook or Google, all in English with full reports on campaigns on an easy to use platform. You can run small budget test campaigns to dial in the right audience and then increase when you found out what works. We recommend polished and refined visual content because that's a staple in China at this point. And it can be a good idea to get a rough idea of what your competitors are doing so that you have some information to work with. It's not saying that you want to copy them or emulate them, but it's just that if they're doing something that is very effective, you can use that in a way that suits your brand. Coupons are big in China and they can help too. And it ties in with that high value and the psychology around getting a good deal. So that's another option. Another thing is joining online hashtag trends. Perhaps not the more bizarre ones, but ones that allow brands to show some personality and to fit in with your target market. Other ideas could be working with KOLs, but make sure you test the waters and have some presence in China first. If you're completely random and new, you'll get a lot less traction and results. WeChat mini programs can serve as a website alternative, a landing page, or another easy access contact point. And typically, the Chinese need twice as many contact points to get a sale compared to the West. Of course, that scales based on the price and the type of product, but that's just an interesting piece of information to know. If you're selling physical goods, getting listed on Tmall, Taobao, or JD will help you get found and make selling much easier. And I think I covered brand identity pretty well a little earlier. Shopping festivals, I think I also covered that, but again, they're huge. Whether it's organic social media, paid advertising campaigns, or working with a KOL, it's definitely worthwhile making some noise and getting eyes on that. As I showed with the 618 festival, an unreal amount of money gets spent during those festivals. If you're selling through your own platforms, then accepting Tenpay, WeChat Pay, Alipay, or some common online payment system in China is, of course, essential. And the last point is less specific, but don't be afraid to adapt. According to a recent survey by PricewaterhouseCoopers, 75% of enterprises recognized a strong need to accelerate digital transformation in their organizations, and 70% expected a negative impact of up to 30% reduction of their bottom line if their strategies remain unchanged. And there's no way to hide from digital, and soon I think it'll be fair to say there's no way to hide from globalization when it comes to trade and shifting market conditions as well. So to touch on a few points for why now is a good time for China, there is light at the end of the tunnel and there are opportunities to take advantage of. And more than that, there's a logic and reason behind them. It's one thing to say what the opportunities are, it's another thing entirely to see that there's sense behind them. Now, China's role has shifted to becoming a world driving market, and we perceive this crisis will position China even further ahead. So much so that it's likely that the companies which leverage China to stay afloat through the next 12 months or however long this lasts, they'll be in a position where they can emerge successfully from the crisis while their competitors are either forced to close, struggle, go into debt, or face harder times. With China doing better now, there's a chance to jump on and ride that wave. And consider that. What impact could this have on your business? While China is still facing challenges, it's really making a comeback, giving international companies who are facing challenges in struggling home markets an opportunity to potentially survive and thrive. The world will take time to get back on their feet, but investing in China now may get you into a nice position, because China will be a core market and source of growth well into the future. There will also be lots of adjustments made as we acclimatize to the new normal when the world comes out the other side of this pandemic. So now is a smart time to get set up. And with that, I'd like to introduce Henrik and Jay for the Q&A. If you haven't already, be sure to add your questions into the chat now. Henrik and Jay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Brad, and thank you for sharing all the up-to-date information on China. And thank you, everyone, for your questions so far. Any comment, Jay, or do we just jump straight into the questions?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So the first question was, which portion of the online advertising industry does AdChina cover with the available channels? Are the channels that AdChina does not have access to?
So first of all, actually, I have to update everyone that Chinese media channel landscape is very different from the West. There are mainly two things that are very different. One is, of course, the channels themselves. They are usually not. They are usually different from the Western channels. And then another thing is that there are happenings all the time. You have the rising power. I mean, every year or every second year, which is, I mean, for example, ByteDance, which was not in the market, say 4 or 5 years ago, not that big, but now they are actually the largest advertising channel in China, or when it comes to revenue. Already surpassing Tencent, which has been in the market for a long time. So we have basically connected to all the major channels that we believe that we should be connected to. So for example, with Tencent, we have all four major channels of theirs covered, including WeChat, Mobile QQ, Tencent Video, and Tencent News. Oh yeah, sorry, 5, and also their largest application store in China, which is called Yingyongbao, or Tencent App Store. And then with Baidu, we have the Baidu Feeds, and Baidu Search Engine Marketing, which is equivalent to Google in the West. And then LinkedIn in China is separated from LinkedIn outside China. So we are connected with LinkedIn China. We are also connected with the 3 channels of ByteDance, including Douyin, Xigua Video, and Toutiao, which is the top news app in China. We are also consistently working on integrating with upcoming, uprising channels at the same time. So yeah, I think we are very confident to say that, I mean, by getting access to AdChina.io, you're basically getting access to all the mainstream channels in China when it comes to advertising.
So second question, do the existing channels have something like the Facebook Pixel in order to create custom audiences for retargeting purposes?
Everyone has something, but not exactly like not exactly Facebook pixels. Everyone has something, and then but then retargeting is always possible, actually, at least for most of the channels. Yeah.
Do I need a Chinese business entity to start selling in China?
Largely, no, but it's depending on the industry. I don't know which industry we're talking about here, but actually, you can reach out to us and we can give you more specific answers to that. Yeah, but in general, no, usually not.
Yeah. And what I can say also there, it's not something that we do, but we can recommend you someone that has done well in the past. What's the minimum testing ad budget you recommend to get started?
Minimum, that's very much dependent on what industry you're in as well, and what kind of audience you're trying to reach. I mean, minimum. I mean, the best thing about AdChina.io is that we managed to lower down the entry barrier of going into China and launch some advertising campaigns to a very, let's say, low level. I mean, lower than ever, basically. But then different channels, as I mentioned, those different channels, they have different minimum, what do you call it, initial charge to the advertising account. Some are cheaper than the others. I mean, the smallest one would be, I would say, on the level of $1,000 or $2,000 US dollars, basically, to launch a small. Actually, the campaign budget can be even smaller than that. What I'm talking about is only the initial charge, and then when you charge the account, you can choose to launch very, very small incremental campaigns on at china.io, which helps you to build the understanding of the market and also of your product match as well. And then once you find the right recipe or combination of elements like channel, message, creatives, and then you press you push the pedal and launch something bigger. So it can be very small. But in general, there is one suggestion I would give to everyone who wants to go into Chinese market with digital marketing and online channels, is to have a longer perspective, so longer horizon. Plan a good, make a good plan of, let's say, longer time, but then be very cautious when it comes to every small campaigns that you're going to Chinese market. Try to make them small, especially in the beginning. And that is the way of doing it. You want to test out the market, but then don't go in big and then fail, and then leave. That's not the way of doing it. Have a longer perspective of this, and then give yourself some time, and also in order to launch small campaigns and test out the market and test out the different channels. China can provide you with multi-channel strategy, and you should really compare the performance of different channels and different messages and creatives. Yeah.
Mm. So then it's a question from from fruit specific, exporting of nectarine, plums, peaches, things like that. So question is, does China.io have experience advertising fresh produce?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We have some customers from, for example, seafood industry, which is also very fresh and sensitive, time sensitive. Yeah.
So the second part of that question is, how targeted can the advertising? And I'm a little unsure on the. It says how targeted can be the advertising to link to online sales platforms selling a brand, and I interpret that to mean how targeted the advertising can be towards the segment. If that's the wrong interpretation, please let me know in the chat.
Looking at the question, I think it's the two things. One is first of all, two sides. First of all, the platform that we have, and also, most of the channels in China, they can be very targeted when it comes to the audience. So it's very targeted, and you have all the geography, demography, interest, behavior, platform, network connections, financial status, marital status. A lot of targeting tools that you can play with. Second is that you talked about the sales platforms. So in China, the difference compared to the West is that in China they have several ecosystems, and that they don't actually share traffic with each other. They don't direct the traffic to each other. So, for example, if you run a campaign on WeChat, for example, it will be very hard for you to direct the traffic easily, smoothly over to any platform of Alibaba, for example. You will have to make those missing links, and then it's tedious, and it's also costing you traffic as well. That's the challenge in China. So in China, depending on which sales platform your product is on, or maybe your product is on different platforms, then you can choose, pick and choose different media channels to direct the traffic, to generate and direct traffic towards specific sales platforms as well. So yeah, we have customer doing that as well. They run different campaigns, leading, generating and leading traffic to different sales platforms because of the limitations and the efficiency as well.
So next question is, okay, thanks for sharing the data on what is currently happening, but what's your thoughts on the more long-term development of the Chinese market, thinking especially on the pressure from US and some other countries?
Yes. I think we are in a very exciting times, actually. It's we don't know. I don't think we're in the position to make any predictions here. But in general, I mean, if you look at the economy, where you have the largest economy, which is the U.S., and you have the second largest economy, which is China. If you look at the numbers, if you only look at the numbers, I think Chinese economy is growing faster than anybody else on this level of the size. So. And also the third is that China has, in fact, the largest middle class income population in the world. So the reason why we're doing this is because so first of all, this existing size of the Chinese market is, from our point of view, cannot be ignored, cannot be left out as well. So, and second, we believe in the future as well. We believe that the future of Chinese economy is going to be even bigger and more attractive to the rest of the world compared to today. And also, I think, of course, there are a lot of geopolitical things going on, and then different people have different interpretation and also different predictions as well. But from our point of view, it will be very, I would say, surprising to everyone that China as an economy, as a market, will just lay down and die. I think that's going to be a very, I mean, I don't think anyone would dare at this moment to predict that. So as long as that is not happening, then I think, as I said, Chinese market cannot be ignored for anyone who wants a future or of growth, basically.
Next one is, how important is our home country branding to doing business in China?
I have a saying. This is something. Everybody gets a new chance in China. It's very, it's very interesting, but not as much as before. I mean, in the beginning, I mean, if you look at several international brands when they went into Chinese market, they started to brand themselves to something very totally different compared to their brand image back home, like IKEA, like H&M. Both of them are from Sweden. Actually, they managed to go high. But then, you know, the world is becoming more and more, I would say, transparent, at least thanks to the internet. But basically, I would say that back home, if your brand is recognized, is popular, or is even dominating in certain sector or segment, it definitely helps your positioning in China. It is, I mean, of course, I mean, because Chinese people, when they try to buy something, or consumers especially, when they try to buy something, they would like to buy something that is so-called a popular brand, basically, outside China. Right now, we have a lot of customers going into Chinese market. Some of them are, let's say, are big in China already. Some of them are not. But then, from our experience, the ones with the, let's say, bigger footprint at home for their brand, have let's say a more leverage when they go into Chinese market in the beginning. Okay. Yeah.
So how crowded is the market now in China? Worried that we are too late?
We're too late. No, we're not too late. So first of all, it's not too late. The good thing about Chinese market is that every niche is big enough. Every niche is big enough. And also another good thing about Chinese market is very interesting, because China has a very wide spectrum when it comes to income and development status. The good thing about Chinese market, beside the size and the spectrum, is that actually every ladder is moving up consistently. So except the, let's say, the lowest one, because China is actually spending, I would say this is the top priority of Chinese society and government is to eliminate poverty. So basically, if you look at the segment, so every segment is growing except the lowest one. It's I think it's just perfect for place for many brands from all over the world. You just have to, of course, it's so from my point of view, it is not a hidden opportunity anymore. Chinese market is not a hidden opportunity anymore, especially after COVID-19, when many brands are, let's say, suffering and struggling back home. So a lot of, with our experience, a lot of companies are looking towards China. So finally, they have most of them have thought about it before, but many of them have just decided to put into action. Yes, it's going to be crowded. It's going to be a lot of, let's say, brands going into Chinese market exactly at this moment, and probably going to continue for the next 12 to 18 months. There is a number from Tmall, for example. They had a record high foreign brands, or let's say, yeah, Western brands going into China, going into their marketplace. The first quarter, no, actually, actually 2 months, March and April, record high actually. So it is happening. It's going to become an obvious opportunity, but if you don't do it now, I think it's probably going to be late. Yeah, because more and more brands are looking into Chinese market now at this moment. Exactly.
Yeah, I think let's do one more question. This is, do you have some advice on working with KOLs to market beauty products?
We have a lot of that actually experience. I think especially because of the size of this market in China. It's not only beauty, it's also related products that are linked to this particular group of consumers, like weight control, for example, like food replacement, like something with stronger effect and so on, like what do you call it, what do they call it, medical beauty products, this kind of as well. I mean, the market is huge actually, and then because of this nature, actually, because of the nature of this industry, as well as the kind of the behavior of the audience, you have to consider to use KOLs in this area. But then when it comes to KOL in China, the good thing about this channel, or type of channel, is that it's very commercialized. So you have a lot of selections or options to pick from. And then the best thing about it is that also, I mean, it's extremely commercialized. In the West, you have KOLs that are doing something just for fun. or just for a cause that they are interested in. But in China, I mean, most of the KOLs are commercialized. In a way, everyone has a price, basically. Not necessarily living up to that price, but everyone has a price. And then it can be quite expensive and also risky as well when you are picking them. It's from our experience, we by the way, we haven't managed to programmatic this channel to our platform. That also shows the complexity of this market as well. It's a lot of experience, a lot of expertise, a lot of efforts involved as well. So if you want to know more, just contact us, and we can give you something, at least something to read first, and then we can analyze your case specifically and help you.
Yeah. I think with that, we've answered the questions we have received, and I think we just get it in within the time. Any final comment from you, Jay?
No, I think this is a great content. We have been doing this, by the way. I mean, for the audience, for the new audience, new participants in this webinar, we have been doing this since April, actually, and proudly we made some predictions of the market from the beginning. And then proudly, we have seen them happening along the way. If you go back and watch our video, I mean, there are a lot of, let's say, good content over there as well. I would encourage the audience to have a look at our previous webinars. Some of them are for different industries as well. And then, yeah, feel free to contact us.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Brad. And with that, we wish you all a safe and productive week.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.